Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to talk all about perfect square trinomials. So the first thing we're going to do is say, how do I know if this trinomial is a perfect square? And then secondly, we're going to say, okay, now that this is a perfect square trinomial, is there a certain pattern that I could use in order to factor it? Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, how do I know if a trinomial is a perfect square trinomial? Well, we have to check what the numbers are in the trinomial, right? We know we have ax squared plus bx plus c. Notice sometimes a might be 1, right? So that might also just look like x squared plus bx plus c, okay? Well, this trinomial would be perfect square trinomial if we take the number that's in the place of b and we divide it by 2, and then we square it. And if that's equal to a times c, then it's a perfect square trinomial. So let's check a couple of these down here at the bottom. Are these perfect square trinomials? So the first one is x squared plus 24x plus 144. So notice that a is 1, b is 24, and c is 144. So we're going to take b and divide it by 2, and then we're going to square it. So this would give us 12 squared, which is 144. And a is 1, and c is 144. So we get 144. And since those two terms right there are equivalent, then we know that yes, this is a perfect square trinomial. All right, look at number 2. 25x squared minus 60x plus 36. So let's take negative 60. You could also just do 60 because we're going to end up squaring it, so it's going to be positive anyways. So let's take negative 60 divided by 2, and we'll square it. Just as a reminder, a is 25, b is negative 60, and c is 36. Okay, so now we get negative 30, and we square it, so we get 900. And now we want to do 25 times 36 because that's a times c, and we do in fact get 900. So since, once again, these two terms are equal, yes, number 2 also is a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so now let's look at number 3. Hopefully this is not a perfect square trinomial, right? Or this wouldn't be a very good video. All right, so number 3. B is, let's see, a is 36, b is 45, and c is 9. So we're going to take b and divide it by 2, and then we're going to square it. So 45 divided by 2 gives us 22.5. And once we square that, we get 506 point, scroll up a little bit, 25. Okay, so now we're going to do 36 times 9, and this is 324, right? So now once we look at these two numbers here and they are not equal to each other, then we're going to say no, number 3 is not a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so now once we figure out the trinomial is a perfect square, how can we factor it? Okay, well, we can say, you know, like in the previous video that we did, find two numbers that add to b and multiply to c, right? That's definitely possible, especially on number 1 where a is 1. For number 2, you know, we could do the magic x, or we could factor GCF possibly. And then, you know, find what two numbers add to b and multiply to c. However, if it's a perfect square trinomial, we have a little bit of a shortcut. So we know that the standard form, or perfect square trinomials, are the standard form version of the square of a binomial pattern. So when we're factoring a perfect square trinomial, that's what we should have in our head as our end goal. We want our final answer in factored form to be just one binomial squared, okay? So we see that right here, and remember, once again, we have two different types of square of a binomial pattern, one with addition, so plus 2ab, and one with subtraction, minus 2ab. So the only difference here is that we could have a plus b squared, or we could have a minus b quantity squared. We just have to take a look at what our sign is in our trinomial. So let's look at example number 1. So one thing that we can do is rewrite this in the form a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So if we say a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. Notice since that was addition, I went with plus 2ab, okay? All right, so now we're going to say this would be x squared plus this 2 is there already, okay? A is x, but now for b, we got to be careful a little bit here. Our final term for b, our final number for b is 26. So, or 26x, right? So if we have a 2 right here, and we have an x, what do we multiply 2x by to get 26x? 13, right? So we know we need to put a 13 right here, which must mean that b is 13. So now we have 13 squared. So now we can take and we can write this as a plus b squared, right? So a plus b quantity squared. Well, we know a is x, and we know that b, once we saw it there in two separate locations, is 13. Okay, so our final answer would be x plus 13 quantity squared. All right, let's look at number 2. Now we have a number that is for a that is other than 1, right? So we could factor this by doing the magic x and solving it by grouping, right? We've made a previous video about that, so I'll post the link to that video in the description below. But we look at this one and we say, okay, 4x squared minus 2x plus 9. We see that subtraction sign in there, so we're going to say a squared minus 2ab plus b squared. So in order for us to get 4x squared, we had to have started at 2x, right? Because 2x squared, we would square the 2 and the x, which would give us 4x squared. Minus, this 2 is part of our formula, right, or our pattern. We just decided that a was 2x, and now we have to figure out what b is. Well, keep in mind we have a negative 12x there. So if we already have 2 and 2x, right, that's going to be minus 4x. So what do we multiply negative 4x by to get 12x, or negative 12x? Well, we know this needs to be a 3. Okay, so now we're going to say plus 3 squared. All right, so now we can write this as a minus b squared. Okay, so we saw a right here, 2x, so we're going to say 2x minus, and we see b right there. So 2x minus 3 quantity squared. All right, and so that's perfect square trinomials, how to recognize them, how to check if a trinomial is a perfect square, and then also how to factor a perfect square trinomial so that it ends up as the square of a binomial.